So thank you all very much for joining. This is an update on the Emin project, which is a collaboration between the Mekong Club and Diginex. We will start by giving a bit of a recap of the project, how it came to be, as well as an overview of our implementation activities. We will also share some key learnings from both a technical and implementation perspective in terms of how we've actually been implementing this tech within supply chains and some recommendations that we can make for other organizations that are looking to implement new technologies within their work. So we do understand that some of the initial information may be a repeat of what some of you have already encountered. You may be quite familiar with this, but we're really aiming to cover all elements of this project. So thank you for your patience to those of you who may be more familiar with the technology just within the kind of initial part of this webinar. My name is Phoebe Ewen and I'm a project manager for Hong Kong-based organisation, the Mekong Club. We are an NGO that works collaboratively and positively with the private sector to combat modern slavery in all of its forms. We also have Mark Blick from Diginex on the line. Mark, did you want to give a quick intro?
Thank you, Phoebe. Good afternoon or good morning to everyone. My name is Mark Blick and I head up government solutions at Diginex. We're a global blockchain technology and financial services company headquartered in Hong Kong with 7 offices worldwide. Over the past 2.5 years, I've been leading initiatives to leverage technology to enhance the labor recruitment process, guided by folks like Phoebe, particularly through public-private partnerships and also blended finance consortiums.
Thanks, Mark. So we'll start giving a recap of the project. So at the Mekong Club, we hold regular industry working groups for companies and organizations where we bring together our private sector partners and we share the common issues that affect their ability to combat modern slavery within supply chains. So some of the key issues that we hear time and time again coming from the private sector lie within the broader kind of sphere of supply chains lacking transparency. So we see cases whereby employment contracts are perhaps fraudulent. They may be confiscated as a means to exercise control over workers. They may be signed in a language that's different to the worker's native tongue, or the worker may not understand. They may actually be changed from the point of signing to when the worker starts employment within the factory or the farm in which they're working. Or in some cases, employment contracts and related documentation may not even exist in the first place. We also see limited visibility when it comes to social audits. So these are the tools that companies really rely on in order to identify problems within their supply chains, within their suppliers, identify labor exploitation and really understand if the products that they're producing are free from any kind of forced labor. Now, this limited visibility makes it quite challenging, especially when we see multiple versions of the truth being presented by some organizations or suppliers. So for example, we may have 2 companies, both of which use the same supplier, but have a slightly different policy when it comes to overtime. Now, the supplier may simply present different versions of the truth to these 2 different companies in line with the policy that they expect to be seeing. So there's often a lack of consistency between these types of documentation and paperwork. Furthermore, within the supply chain ecosystem, there's multiple different parties. So you have the workers, you have the employment brokers, employment agencies, you may have factory managers, you'll have buying brands, intermediaries, you have social auditors, all of these different parties, and oftentimes there's a lack of trust between these stakeholders. We can't always guarantee that the information that we're being presented by stakeholders within the supply chains is accurate and lacks and is without fraud. There's also a lack of oversight in supply chains. So oftentimes companies, large buying brands, will have multiple first-tier suppliers, up to thousands of first-tier suppliers, and many of these will have hundreds of suppliers of their own. You can see how very, very quickly this gets very complicated for those organizations looking to track where their products have truly come from. In addition to these issues around supply chain transparency, we've also identified a number of issues around our traditional data management systems that companies currently use. They tend to be quite inefficient and very prone to manipulation. So oftentimes, participants may be managing separate records of the same data. There may be discrepancies between these data sets that just go by unnoticed. There may be duplication of work and overuse of technological resources. Furthermore, there's often a reliance on a paper-based process. So when data moves between parties, there's a chance for manipulation or human error. There's a chance for things to get lost. And there's often inconsistencies within the data. So as we mentioned before, users may be presented with several versions of the same data, several versions of what is considered to be the truth, or they may receive information in an untimely manner, making it simply too late to act on issues as they arise. So these conditions around data sharing and data security, as well as issues of supply chain transparency, can lead to widespread undetected cases of exploitation, and in the very most extreme cases can lead to modern day slavery. So workers, excessive recruitment fees, they may find that their wages are not the same as the wage they were promised when they were recruited. They may be working excessive overtime. They may be finding that their wages are being deducted from to pay for things like rent by the factory. Often this leads people to fall into cycles of debt and violence. And this permeates through supply chains globally, and it impacts virtually every industry in the world currently. We estimate around 40.3 million men, women, and children are currently in situations of modern day slavery, and many more are experiencing exploitation within their employment. Naturally, this is a hugely devastating reality for the people involved. It also poses a huge challenge for companies themselves. So think about the reputational and consumer perceptions, the risk there. If a company is to find or have found to have had modern slavery within their supply chains, this can change consumer perceptions of the organizations completely forever. It can drive consumers away, drive consumers to competitors that are perceived to be more ethical in their practices. It can also result in monetary fines. So there's increasing legislation that's coming out, the UK Modern Slavery Act, the Australia Modern Slavery Act, that are increasingly holding companies responsible to ensure that their supply chains are free from modern day slavery. Along with this legislation, there are increasing reporting requirements and expectations of companies. Also, companies that don't have complete oversight over their supply chains and may have modern slavery risk within their supply chains leave themselves vulnerable to have their goods confiscated by customs, particularly in the US. Recently, we've seen some large imports being confiscated because they cannot be guaranteed to be free from modern day slavery. So you can see businesses must care about this issue, not just because it's the right thing to do, which it is, and because of the huge human risk, but also the huge business risk that it poses to their operations. So what is blockchain technology? The Emin platform uses blockchain technology, and I'm sure many of you are quite well versed in this technology. Many of you may be totally new to the technology. We'll keep this definition fairly high level, but we can certainly address the intricacies during the Q&A session if needed. So blockchain is a digital ledger of economic transactions that can be programmed to capture not just financial transactions, but also essentially any transaction of value. So when we talk about these transactions, we may be talking about the sharing of information, or the sharing of data, or the sharing of documents, for example, as a transaction. Now you can see here, these two diagrams, the difference between a traditional data exchange and a blockchain-based system. Within the regular data exchange on the left, you see multiple parties. So this may be similar to the multiple parties that you get within a supply chain ecosystem. as we've mentioned before, the workers, the auditors, the brands, the suppliers. Within the regular information exchange system, you see multiple channels of communication. So there's multiple different avenues going on here between the parties. You also see a potential for a lack of trust between these parties, because each one of these parties can't see all of the information that the others can see. This process is also highly inefficient and highly prone to human error, as well as being prone to fraud, as one bad actor within this party can be passing on incorrect information to the others without the whole ecosystem being aware of this. Now, if we look at the blockchain-based system, we can see there's a decentralized record, these blocks in the middle, of all of the transactions that all of the parties have undertaken. And all of the parties in the ecosystem can see the same version of this. Any change is reflected for everybody to see. So every time there's a new transaction, everybody can see this update. This removes the need for multiple channels of communication, and it removes the need for intermediaries, as this is a decentralized system, and it brings greater trust, transparency, and security to the process, as we can say with confidence that the information that we're looking at is the same as the information that our peers are looking at. Now, why is this relevant to the Emin project? So we have built Emin using blockchain technology. Now, to bring this kind of theoretical blockchain to reality, we can take the employment contract as an example. So if we store a record of the employment contract information using blockchain technology, that employment contract cannot be altered without a record being made on the blockchain. So all of the parties in the ecosystem can see X person's employment contract has been altered. It cannot be accessed without permission from the group, so there's greater security there, and it cannot be deleted or cannot be confiscated. So importantly, currently we see issues whereby workers' employment contracts are literally locked away from them. This cannot happen if it's stored using the blockchain. If there was an attempt to delete the contract, again, it would be stored on the decentralized ledger. So a permanent secure record is made for the worker to then access at any time. Now, blockchain solutions are appropriate when the following 5 criteria are fulfilled. And this is important, we think, because there are many projects out there that maybe turn to blockchain because it's exciting, it's a buzzword, and it's this brand new technology that's cited to be a silver bullet against all of these issues in the world. We're really trying to move away from these kinds of misconceptions and make sure that we're applying blockchain only where it's appropriate. So the following 5 criteria: when there is a need for trust, transparency, and security, when there are multiple stakeholders within this ecosystem, as we've already discussed, that need to interact with each other and need to build this trust with each other, where there's a capacity for scale. So where organizations have the capacity and have the resources and have the drive, so the impetus to change, to implement this kind of technology within their supply chains, as well as an existing organizational structure that facilitates the implementation of this technology. So there's a reason that we have started using this technology within factory systems, for example, rather than trying to implement this within the home worker ecosystem that lacks structure currently. So the Emin project came into being due to us applying these principles to the challenges that we have identified within supply chains. So if we just circle back to those issues, we have issues around employment contracts being deleted, confiscated, being substituted. We have real limited visibility by the auditors, by the brands, multiple versions of the truth being presented to these organizations, a lack of trust between the stakeholders in these vast ecosystems that make up global supply chains, and a total lack of oversight in many cases, or a lack of ability to truly understand the extent of supply chains in many industries across the world. So the Emin platform aims to bring greater trust, transparency and security to the labour recruitment process by recording key worker documentation using blockchain technology. It's essentially a wallet for all worker documentation, equipping workers with access to their own information and allowing employers to better understand their workforce so they can better report, better demonstrate transparency, and better demonstrate their commitment to an ethical workforce. This is a standalone application, or it can also be integrated into existing platforms such as HR management systems. For employers, this platform crucially allows a comprehensive overview of the workforce across tiers and factories. Now, we're just going to show a couple of skills from the platform. I think it's best really experienced in a full-on demo, which we don't have time for today. So if you are interested in arranging a demo for yourselves or your organisation, please don't hesitate to get in touch once this webinar is over. Now you can see here the kind of aggregated data that we can pull from this platform simply by uploading key worker information, key worker documentation with their permission. So managers can view aggregated data, they can better understand their workforce demographics, they can see potentially where the risk may lie, so identify issues around gender imbalance, for example, or around the age distribution of their factories. And this can stretch out across multiple factories, multiple tiers, multiple countries. The platform facilitates the sending out of regular questionnaires, so these can be tailored to enrich this data and to tailor the data that we're pulling in as per the preference of the brand or the organisation using the platform. So for example, we may have a data set that is recorded at worker onboarding around key worker demographics, where they've come from, where they're going to, their age, whether they've paid recruitment fees, things like this. And then throughout the worker's employment, we may push forward further questionnaires to record grievances, for example, to understand their experience, to understand if they're working any excessive overtime, for example. Social governance data can then be extracted to support sustainability strategy and to comply with local labour laws. So, for example, we can use this platform to understand expected overtime, real overtime, and whether workers understand their rights in relation to overtime. Likewise, issues that are raised can be managed quickly due to an integrated case management system, which can flag issues immediately and can then escalate them using the system. So this helps combat current issues that we see within reporting, whereby, say, for example, within an audit, an issue with forced overtime may be raised, but we won't actually be able to remediate and fix that issue for a number of months. So this is just a screenshot of the worker document wallet. So this wallet is unique to each worker. It allows the organisation and the employee to upload various bits of data, such as their employment contract, which can be uploaded and approved by both parties, training materials and handbooks, as well as things like work permits and copies of identification documentation can all be stored here, and where they need to be can be approved by one or multiple people. Here is an example of pushing out a questionnaire to identify key social compliance data around passport retention, around recruitment fees, around document retention, for example. So these can be designed in line, very much in line with things like ILO indicators, and we have a selection of questionnaire examples that we would share with an organisation looking to roll out this platform. Also, finally and importantly, there is an ongoing audit trail as part of this platform. So all of the transactions kind of being referred to in the blockchain sense, so data, documents, agreements, these are all recorded and displayed, and a record of the blockchain transaction reference is also stored within this audit trail, and it's date and time stamped, so you can see every single change that has been made. So overall, this platform has been designed to really benefit all of the different stakeholders within supply chains. So for employment agencies, we're looking to work with those ethical recruiters, ethical recruitment agencies that want to demonstrate their commitment to greater transparency, and demonstrate their ability to share data in a secure way across borders from the country of origin to the country of destination for the migrant worker. We are also very keen to work with organisations and companies that wish to better their reporting standards, better their commitments to anti-slavery efforts. And in addition to that, obviously, we'd like to work with their auditors, make their lives easier, move away from a paper-based process, and better target their risk assessments by better understanding the key demographic information of the workforce. The selected information around demographics can, with permission, be shared with external parties as needed. So governments, for example, NGOs that work with the organisations. We found that managers enjoy using the platform because it brings greater efficiency to a currently very, very inefficient process. It allows them to have a full record of their worker information in one place, organised very, very effectively. It allows them to very easily reach out to workers and push forward these tailored questionnaires that have been developed with the guidance of the organisations and NGOs involved. And finally, and most importantly, this empowers the workers with digital copies of all of their original employment documentation that they have access to permanently. So this has been designed to guard against exploitation by contract manipulation, substitution and confiscation, and empower workers with an ongoing record of their employment from now and into the future. So hopefully that was a clear explanation. Please feel free to add your questions into the chat box. Going to pass over to Mark now to talk a little bit about how far we've come with the Emin project so far.
Thank you, Phoebe, and hello, everybody. So I'm going to run through over the next 4 or 5 slides and really our journey over the last 2.5 years from where we were to where we are now and where we're going to be, and give some context as to product development. Phoebe, next slide, please. So if we go back to early 2018, we at Diginex were very much looking for what we believed would be a fundamentally good project. And by good, I mean project with a good purpose that had a positive societal impact that would also help us validate the technology. We believe strongly in the concept that a socially well-governed company is the strongest indicator for a well-run company. And it was at that time that very serendipitously we met with the Mekong Club, and Phoebe introduced us to the work that she's just been over in the last few slides. And then was very humble and said, I know nothing about blockchain, and then produced a white paper she had written on how blockchain could help combat modern slavery. And that for us really became our guiding star on where we should start and how we should think about product development, particularly around the concept of contract immutability and transparency around fees. So shortly thereafter, in the summer of 2018, we started working with 6 members of the Mekong Club's retail and footwear and apparel working groups to design a platform. This is version 1 that launched in October 2018 that was very much focused from the perspective of a head of sustainability or a head of audit or head of a compliance, as well as from a migrant worker perspective, on the contract verification and affirmation and being able to share that information externally to multiple parties. Next slide, please. We then went live for our first project. This was funded by the British government in Thailand, looking at aquaculture, Burmese migrant workers, some legal, some illegal, coming across the border, working in very seasonal and informal work on Thai shrimp farms. This for us, as we'll see in the subsequent slide, it's still an ongoing project and it's very important for us. We have a general thinking that if we can make it work here, we can make it work anywhere. It's a very challenging environment. Technological infrastructure is very undeveloped, but we got some, and we continue to develop a lot of key learnings and understandings of how to encourage adoption, particularly through mobile-based applications. But then when we came back from that first pilot and then understanding that whilst we had developed a fairly strong consumer front end, or a front end that can be used by migrant workers, to really drive the impact of the platform was to then combine it with a data provenance and document handling platform called Diginex Trust, and we worked on in over 6 months to launch that with a large global food and beverage manufacturer with operations through the Gulf Coast countries. And this is where it became less of a in-the-field mobile platform, but more of an enterprise software-ready platform that we can integrate into existing infrastructures like SAP, Oracle, and Workday. Next slide, please, Phoebe. So I'll touch, for the slide moving very slowly, I'll touch very quickly on this next project. It's not strictly related to Emin, but we think of it as a very close sister project. Late last year, also, we started working with the United Nations IOM on a platform called IRIS Safer. Most folks on the phone will be familiar with the IRIS principles, International Recruitment Integrity System, and Safer self-assessment for ethical recruitment. So this was to allow recruitment agents to get a better understanding of where they're progressing towards their goal of certification according to the IRIS principles on ethical best practices for recruitment. Also allowing the IOM to lean in with capacity building and skills building, and then extract data which they can use for policy advocacy when highlighting areas to local labor legislators that needed more attention. We bring this up now, and I'll come back to it later, because as we look at the different stakeholders within this ecosystem, we're already working with companies, we're working with migrants, and we're working with civil society broadly. It was important for us to also have a key stakeholder group amongst recruitment agents that migrant workers journey through when passing from country of origin to their end destination. At the end of January, or mid-January this year, so we go back to version 1 of Diginex Trust. That was very much that document handling platform, looking at verification of contracts with some simple functionality around social governance. But I think where the platform is now, and we saw a couple of slides earlier on, and for those folks who are interested, please reach out to us for a demo. It's really transitioned a lot more into a detailed social governance data collection platform, where we've worked with folks like the Mekong Club and IOM to understand what are the key social governance indicators we need to examine. And also importantly, at what stage of a migrant worker's journey do we need to ask those questions? And then how frequently should we ask them? Is it pre-departure once? Is it post-arrival twice? And being able to integrate that into an existing platform that looks at things like contract verification. It then allows auditors and brands to extract that data, as we've seen earlier, for forensic and audit, and to demonstrate adherence either to internal ESG or sustainability policies or to external local labor law legislation. And the case management bit, which is very important, and the early learning of ours last year when we started working in the Gulf Coast countries, is that if you encourage good companies to look for bad stuff, they will inevitably find bad stuff and shouldn't be punished for doing so. So built into the platform now is each time there are data points which surface through this process, which don't align with internal or external policies, there's an inbuilt case management platform that allows folks to demonstrate resolution of that, be it around fees or overtime, passports, or any other potential cases of exploitation. Next slide, please, Phoebe. So earlier this year, we went back to Thailand. I think this project has moved comfortably out of pilot and is now into scale, again, funded by the British government, and looking at a road for 100 farms and 5,000 workers across both the original aquaculture, shrimp farming, but also now going into sugarcane and then possibly also natural rubber. This again continues to be a challenging project for us, but it's one that we feel that we learn many lessons which can be applied elsewhere. And then as we go into Q2, and I think actually most of this will already probably achieve now. So by the end of, let's say, Q2, we will have had the platform translated into several languages. We'll be operational in aqua and agriculture. So as I said, that's shrimp farming, sugarcane, and rubber in Thailand. We're already working with a major global food and beverage manufacturer in Bahrain, and that will expand into the other Gulf Coast countries. Working with a global plastics manufacturer in Malaysia, and then starting to build a government-led pre-departure platform. Next slide, please, Phoebe. So a quick touch on where we are, this is where we are currently. I think in the next, let's say, 6 months, I mean, we would have started expanding in Gulf Coast countries, also in India, and I'll come back to that India point in a second. And then within Southeast Asia, expanding through these countries also into Vietnam and Indonesia. I think what's been interesting is we've worked not only cross geographically but also cross industries, as well as the different learnings that we get, particularly from a technology adoption point of view. And I think I covered this in the learning slide later on. That if we look at different ways in which to drive and encourage adoption, let's say an older demographic working in factories in the Middle East and food and beverage interact with technology in a very different way than a younger demographic do working in factories in Southeast Asia, and the way in which we are able to engage with them differs significantly. It's all built off the same platform, but the user interface changes a lot. And similarly for a structured, let's say a structured factory in plastics manufacturing versus working in the field in agriculture. So Diginex Trust continues to be the core of the platform, but the user interfaces certainly vary across demographics, certainly vary across industries, and certainly vary across age groups too. So I also wanted to touch on an area that we've begun to explore. So with a quarter of global asset managers now basing investment decisions on ESG factors, an ESG strategy has the ability to reward and shape company policies and positively impact social and environmental issues. To date, the focus within the investment world has largely been on the environmental, so the E side, with extensive research having been done into certain products, as we well know, and their possible effects on the environment. So from let's say, global warming to deforestation. The topic that we're covering today in modern slavery is one of the most underweighted indicators of the S stream, largely because it's currently the least quantified and therefore attracts minimal investment. At present, there are no standardized criteria for measuring social factors related to modern slavery. And S, the social S, is seriously underconceptualized and fails to draw substantive and procedural human rights standards. And that's despite sweatshop scandals resulting in an average loss of $60 million per bad news that was exposed. And I think Phoebe covered this before, that the loss of preferential customs clearance, being called out by Ricky Gervais at the Golden Globes, or whatever it may be. There's a significant cost of being caught with cases of exploitation. Furthermore, as we well know, S is not investor focused, meaning it lacks quantitative indicators. And studies have shown that an access to 1,700 S indicators across 12 reporting frameworks found that only 14% of those S ratings targeted investors as the primary audience versus 97% of E and 80% of G ratings. So as we see, already a significant ESG market, which will only increase exponentially over the next 5, 10, 20 years. The underweighting of S means there's significant progress to be made. And working together with the Mekong Club, who have developed a comprehensive set of modern slavery indicators, our work through Emin and Diginex Trust will facilitate the investment process and in turn reward and recognize both responsible companies and investors. Phoebe, back to you, I think.
Thanks. Thank you, Mark. So this project's been really, really interesting to us for a number of reasons. And one of them is that there's not really anyone else that's doing the same thing to the same scale out there. So it has felt very much like we have been entering into the unknown. And as part of this process, we're really, really keen to make sure that we're continually sharing our findings, sharing our mistakes, and sharing our successes when it comes to implementing this kind of innovative technology within supply chains. So here are some of the learnings that we've gathered from an implementation perspective. One of the most important learnings is to engage all stakeholders throughout the design process and develop a really continual feedback mechanism for all stakeholders and all parties that will be using the technology now and into the future. Now, we learned this lesson quite early on within our first pilot in Thailand. In developing the initial workflow, we had consulted with brands, we'd consulted with CSR managers, with procurement people, we consulted with NGOs, we developed questionnaires in line with the ILO guidance. However, it wasn't until we actually got into the farms and started using the technology with the workers and the managers on the ground, we realized that we'd made a number of assumptions around workflow, around technology availability, that we simply hadn't known until we started talking to the people that were really using the platform. So it may seem quite an obvious point, but it really is one of the biggest learnings that we've had. We think it's not only a kind of initial bring workers in at the design phase issue. It's really, really important to be testing and piloting across different industries in different countries, engaging different people throughout. So even now, as the technology is starting to mature, we need to be going back, we need to be talking to the workers as we continue. So that's a really, really interesting learning that we've gathered. Training is also really, really important. So training not just on how to physically use the technology, how to download the app, etc., but training on why this is ultimately important. So why this technology is helping workers, why it's important to demonstrate greater transparency, moving from these are the benefits in terms of efficiencies and benefits in terms of cost savings to these are the benefits for your workforce. Really delivering that training across the board and ensuring that people understand the importance so they don't just use the technology once, they come back to it time and time again. And as we have already mentioned, one of our key learnings is around integration. So rather than go in and say, hey, we've got this innovative new platform, it's a silver bullet, it's going to change everything, it's going to disrupt everything you currently do. That's not helpful, and that's not necessarily what managers want to hear. They want something that will integrate into what they're already doing, that will make their lives easier, that will enhance their existing processes rather than disrupt everything, and actually pose a greater challenge for that reason. So these are some of the learnings from an implementation side. I think Mark would like to share some learnings from the technical.
Yeah, thank you, Phoebe. And next slide, please. So I think I've covered a couple of these already. I'll revisit one or two of them and then talk about some new ones. I mean, I think that the point that dashboards are great, but having surface instances of behavior which doesn't align to internal external policies, there then needs to be, and then what? So what are we going to do about this, and how can we demonstrate that we've done something about it? And then building that capability into the platform so it's very simple for managers to use. That helps drive adoption. And certainly in our first implementations, when managers was seeing cases of fees being flagged or passports being withheld, I think that made people feel nervous. And so it's helping people through that process of, it is natural that if you look, you may find cases. And in some cases, for example, passports were withheld because visas were being processed. And that's absolutely fine, but you need to have case resolution around that and demonstrate that you've done that. Simple stuff, particularly in places like Thailand, the ability, if it's mobile driven, that you have an offline mode so people can still enter in data, and when internet is reconnected, that data then is auto uploaded. The different demographics and different device preferences, I think that was fascinating for us. We had assumed that people within a margin of error would be equally comfortable on touchscreen versus typing, but it really is not the case. And those folks, let's say the older demographic of migrants in the Middle East, who were very comfortable typing, but didn't really touch mobile phones or tablets when we made them available to them, versus when we were in Southeast Asia. And normally when we go for a two-day onboarding and training period, and folks were onboarding themselves on their mobiles before training had even happened, because they were so comfortable with the functionality, and that was a big learning for us. I think there are going to be certain, well, not, I think there will be certain innovations which we're going to be rolling out quite shortly. I think the ability to capture voice recordings of informal work contracts is critical. So this is either in the absence of a paper-based contract, or in addition to a paper-based contract when supplemental terms are being agreed, and then being able to tie that to a unique employment identifier. For logins, and we've gone through various, how do we log in? Do we use retina scans? Do you use thumb scans, so on and so forth? We went for high adoption as most important. And originally it was with phone numbers, but the issue with phone numbers is people change those a lot. Then we went with email addresses, and email addresses are more stable and secure, but not everybody has them. And one of the biggest hurdles we actually had is people have different email addresses on file. So what the migrant worker happens to use may be completely different to the email address that's on file with the HR department or the farm. And so very shortly, we'll be rolling out Facebook login, which will be ubiquitous across all of our products. And that was really born out of everywhere we went, that was a primary channel through which folks communicated. It was so ubiquitous in some markets that it became a synonym for the internet itself. People would just refer to the internet as Facebook. Lastly on here, and I think this is a new innovation we'll see also, is if documentation or requests for fees are being sent to migrant workers, and those migrant workers may not be familiar with, well, is this legitimate? Should I be paying this fee in order to get this medical document? Should I be applying for this visa, and so on and so forth? The ability for that person to then send that to friends and family who may have gone through the process before in order to have a peer-to-peer verification of the process and just get some understanding of, yes, that fee is appropriate in this instance, or no, you should not be signing that document. And that really, I think, strengthens the learning process upstream before migrant workers have left their country of origin, and hopefully will decrease potential cases of exploitation. Thank you, Phoebe. So next steps. I think on a project level, I mean, we will be expanding to several more private sector partners across new industries and new geographies in the next couple of months. We have a strong pipeline and that will continue. And in addition to that, we'll be growing horizontally through the factories of our existing partners. And so I go back to the example of Bahrain, that in the next few months, we'll be working with several other countries within the Gulf Coast. Secondly, and this is very much I have a dream that we're going to do this, and I think it's very exciting, is this year as we begin looking upstream in a migrant worker's journey and commencing the social governance data collection and document verification process pre-departure, which is then continued on the same continuous platform once the worker arrives at the factory as part of an onboarding process. So for example, in our work with the global food and beverage manufacturer in the Middle East, who have 15 different nationalities in their factories there, we'll be starting to work with the recruitment which they've identified in India to onboard workers prior to departure and integrating further with greater interconnectivity with the various other initiatives that we have live and I've mentioned earlier. And I think lastly, the next step will be, and this is really a call to action. We've seen some screenshots of the platform. I mean, it's some basic visuals of what it can do, but it's a lot more powerful live and what it looks like. And I'd encourage all of you on the call who haven't seen it already to contact myself and Phoebe, and we can give you a hands-on demo of what the platform can do, how it can be customized to reflect specific cultural contexts, both on the geographic, demographic, and industry level. We're very much past the conceptual phase of the platform. We've been working on it for over 2 years now and into production mode. And we welcome your feedback and participation. So that's very many thanks from me for everybody for joining this call today. I think we're opening it up to questions right now, and please enter it into the chat box that you'll see on your screen.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, so Heather from Diginex is picking up any questions. Please feel free to enter them into the chat box. Or, of course, you're welcome to reach out to us after the waiver if you have any further questions, or, as Mark said, to arrange a demo for yourselves and your team. So, Mark, I have a couple of technical questions for you that have come in.
Okay.
First, number one. So this is around how blockchain actually works. So the question is, when you upload information onto the blockchain, what information is public and how is personal data protected? Yeah,
thanks. This is a great question and it's frequently asked. And I think there's some misconception around uploading information onto a blockchain. The analogy I like to use is if you go into an old library and you want to look up a book and you go to the front desk and there's an indexing card system, and that indexing card system tells you that the book is on row 3, column J. You go there and the indexing card system will contain a complete history of what happened to that book, who took it out, for how long, and so what days, and so on and so forth. So similarly with Emin, effectively what it is an immutable indexing card system that each time the information is entered, changed, deleted, and so on and so forth, there will be a record of who entered or who changed or who viewed that information, which you can then attach to the document when you submit it externally. So if somebody wants to know, you're sending me the sustainability report, how do I know that the data in it hasn't been manipulated? How do I know you just haven't sent me the data you want to send me? You can attach the immutable audit trail, the sort of figurative indexing card system that helps prove the provenance of the data. So what we're posting onto a blockchain in this instance is the action associated, or the record associated with the action, rather than documentation itself. Of course, the partners that we work with, be they governments, be they intergovernmental organizations, or be they large multinational companies, all have their own data privacy requirements. In many cases, information can't leave the country that we're working in. Many companies will have their own firewalls and so on and so forth. So that the data that is used, or the data that is processed, still remains on the servers that they were originally on, behind sovereign or private sector firewalls. What we're building, again, is the record log of what's happened to that information.
Thank you very much. Second question comes from Ranket, so thank you. So Ranket would like to ask, does the tool need to be set up in such a way that we need to know every stage and every actor of the production supply chain before we can start using it?
Would you like me to take that?
You can take it, and then I'll jump in.
So the answer is no. And I mean, much as it would be nice to have one solution that you roll out from start to finish and it covers everybody, that really, as I think we all will know, is not the reality. And the strategy that we've had is to identify specific parts of the supply chain or migrant workers' journey that we can focus on, generate depth and transparency in those, and then over time connect them. And I referenced earlier the fact that we're working in the Middle East, and I think that project is quite advanced now. And into 2020, what we will start doing is then connecting that with pre-onboarding work that we will be doing in India, and connecting those two parts of the journey. So I think it's about establishing success and transparency in different parts of the supply chain, collecting different types of data, understanding what information needs to be captured at what point, and then connecting those various different parts of the process together over time.
Yeah, I think it really kind of mirrors what I was saying earlier when it comes to implementing a brand new technology that essentially no one really understands how it works. No one really understands the benefits. So having to start relatively small, I guess, and kind of implementing within one relationship and then building out from there is how we're looking to achieve scale with this project. Okay, I have one more question that's just come in. How do we encourage workers to properly and regularly update their data? Now, I can take this one. Will have a work to take on training, to approve a document, etc. These incentives could be a voucher, could be a coupon, or they could be a tick against their name to say that they've done what they need to do. In other cases, we talk to the workers, we train the workers, and we educate them on the benefits of having access to this information all in one place. And overall, overwhelmingly, the feedback that we've got from workers that we have spoken to that have been using this platform is that they really, really enjoy having all of this information in one place. It makes their lives easier, and it means that they can then go to their next employer with access to all of this information. So, Mark, I don't know if you want to add anything, but so far it hasn't been particularly challenging to incentivize the workers to be involved in this platform.
Yeah, I think you're right. And of course, we after each project, we always survey the folks that we work with to understand what did we get right, what could we improve, and the overwhelming responses have been positive from the migrant worker side. I think we have provided incentives. We were quite generous to begin with, and provided 5 gigabytes each time, and so started seeing all sorts of data and documents being uploaded. But really, I think that the efficiency, and so there's a current stage, which is, it's very efficient. I have copies of my passport here, copies of my medical certificates here. There's a link to the company that I will be working with, so I can share everything very safely and easily. I don't need to rummage around for photocopies and so on and so forth. So there's that. Functionalities and features which we are developing, and I think will enhance that, is the ability then to also capture informal work and have that as part of a job history in addition to the formal contracts. And so it becomes just one place in which migrant workers can rely upon to have both formal and informal records of their employment, which they can then demonstrate to future employers.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Michelle, for that question. We have one more. So this one is from Xinyi. Xinyi would like to know, can we go a little bit more into how Emin can be integrated into existing HR platforms, and what kind of access and information would companies need to provide in order to make this happen? It's one for you, Mark.
Okay. So it's what you've seen here, the logos and the branding, that's very much the Emin standalone platform. And when we initially, let's say in a concept phase, when we initially launch, we will work with this. However, if this is to achieve scale, the HR managers don't want to go onto their Workday platform or their SAP platform or Oracle platform, and then also have to go on an Emin platform. It's just duplicate and it's not efficient. So we work with their development and IT team to integrate the technology that we have. So we receive feeds from them and combine it with the platform that we have and the data that we're collecting, so it can be viewed on one user interface.
Great, thanks, Mark. So we have one more question coming in. Thank you guys for all of the great questions. How can a worker have access to their employment contract if the permission of the whole group is needed to access the document? This is from Patricia. Did you get that question?
Yes. So
yeah.
the permission of, so the worker will always have access to his or her employment documentation. So we'll mirror real life. If the worker has access to his or her paper contract, then the worker will have access to his or her virtual contract. Permission from the whole group is not needed to access the document. Permission from a wider group within a blockchain network is needed to change the record associated with that document. Now, when we start off a project, we need to understand what type of viewing permissioning structures do we need to build? So who gets to see what? So obviously within the context of employer-employee, it's pretty straightforward. But then even we're now getting into nuances of an employment contract, a migrant worker will always have access to. Records of salary, an employment worker will always have access to. But what happens if now employers, which is happening, want to share internal let's say health and safety policies with workers for the duration of their employment at that company, and when that worker then leaves, they have the ability to withdraw that policy because it's internal information. So you have that different balance of what is always a worker's versus what can be retracted. But then when you start sharing information externally, that becomes more interesting as to who gets to see aggregated anonymized data versus who gets to see individual information. And that's where we work with, I mean, obviously the companies themselves. We work with civil society like Phoebe and United Nations to understand who should be seeing what information and what is appropriate. But yeah, the permissioning of the whole group is needed to change underlying records, not the access to the documentation. The access to the documentation is determined at the outset, and it can be adjusted over time, but that's determined early on.
Yeah, so just to kind of further clarify that, purely from how this works in practice perspective, when the worker is set up on the platform, they create their own login that's tied to their identity, either through their email address or through their worker ID, or however is best set up for the worker. So they have that login and that is theirs. They have their own password, that is theirs, and then they are always able to use that information to sign in, access their documentation, and share their documentation with their friends and family if they so desire to do so. Okay, we have one more question, again from Xinyi. Yeah, thank you, Xinyi. So do we have any examples of how companies have identified bad practices found through the Emin platform and dealt with them?
Yes, quite a few. I mean, they've identified what are potentially bad practices, and then luckily through case resolution, they're able to demonstrate that. So go back to that original example. This is before we really integrated the case management functionality, that they were surfacing cases of passports being withheld, of fees being paid in companies that have no fees policies. So this did happen, and I remember very clearly that the company we're working with got a little bit spooked. They're asking these questions and then finding out these answers. And so our key learning is, if you are to ask the question, please have a process in place to deal with an answer if it's not the one that you want to receive, as long as you can demonstrate that you're resolving it, and that's tied to the original grievance. So this becomes a combination of asking questions, and also we've now built into this grievance reporting. So for example, if somebody escalates a grievance that the air conditioning hasn't been turned on for a month, similarly there's case resolution that can demonstrate that someone's looked into it and hopefully resolved it, and that's tied back to the original employment, unique employment identifier. So in that particular case around the fees and around the passports was passports had been were not in migrant workers' hands because they'd been handed into the HR department to help them get visas, which is fine, and they were able to demonstrate they looked into it, investigated, and there was satisfactory resolution. And then about fees, and this was another learning for us, is yes, this company had a no fees policy, but fees had been paid by the migrant worker in previous. So in this case, the migrant workers had worked for 2 or 3 other companies before their current employer, and fees had been paid prior to arrival in their current employment. So now we're getting more nuanced in asking, and not just did you pay fees, but where, when, and how, and understanding what can then be done about it.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I think that's actually surfaced a key learning from the implementation side, as you've covered there, in terms of companies actually uncovering data that it's not necessarily malicious practice, but it may just be a case of they haven't thought to ask these questions before. As a result of engaging with this project, not just the platform itself, but the project as a whole, they're learning the kinds of questions, the kinds of best practice examples of the things that they should and could be asking workers on a regular basis. So it's really, really interesting to see how this data is being uncovered, and then subsequently how we can learn from the remediation process, how we can learn how to take this data, learn from it, and move forward, not just in terms of the companies, but wider kind of industry improvements as well. So it's been really, really interesting for us. I think we are out of time.
Yeah, there's one very quick question I'll ask here, which came in earlier, and it's a very brief one, so it's easy to answer. Are you using a public or private blockchain? So far, we've used public blockchains. It's not to say we couldn't use private, because I know some companies have a preference for that, but so far we've used public.
Great, thank you. So if you guys have any further questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch. We really encourage you to get in touch to organise a demo of the platform for yourselves, for your companies, for your teams. We are here and we are ready to do that. So please drop either Mark or myself an email. Our email addresses are there on the screen. We'll also be circulating a recording of this webinar after the session for you to share within your organisations as well. So thank you all very much for joining. Wishing you all safe and well, and hopefully we'll be speaking to you soon.